Hey, Wide Awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories.
I swear the day didn't feel weird at first. If anything, it felt way too normal. We met for dinner, talked about stupid stuff, joked around, and she seemed genuinely into me. Nothing about her screamed danger. She was funny, confident, a little fast-talking, but I just assumed she was nervous. The whole night went by without a single red flag big enough to make me leave early. When we finished eating, she said she had some bags with her because she'd gone shopping earlier. She had 2 tote bags and 1 black backpack that she kept close to her chair the entire night. I noticed she kept touching the zips, making sure they were closed. At the time, I thought she was just paranoid about losing stuff. When we got outside, the air felt colder than before, and the car park was almost empty except for a few scattered cars and streetlights buzzing like they were half broken. She asked if I could help her carry her bags to her car since the straps were digging into her shoulder. I said sure, grabbed the tote bags, and followed her across the car park toward the small silver hatchback. She kept glancing around while walking. Not in a scared way, more like she was checking for someone. Her steps got faster the closer we got to the car. I didn't understand it. Maybe she lived far. Maybe she was worried about time. Maybe she hated being outside at night. I didn't want to overthink it. We reached her car and she put her key in, but before she even unlocked it fully, she stopped and looked around again, like she heard something. Her hand froze on the handle. I asked if everything was okay and she nodded too fast, telling me to just put the bags in the back seat. I walked to the other side to open the door. That's when everything exploded. The sound hit first. Glass shattering. Loud, sharp, violent. Before I could even turn my head, a figure slammed something through the back window of her car, shards flying everywhere. I stepped back so hard I almost fell. The guy reached in through the broken window like he didn't care if he cut himself. He grabbed the black backpack, the one she never let out of her sight, and pulled it out in one motion. She screamed his name. His actual name. Not the name she gave me. They weren't strangers. They knew each other. Before I could even process that, the guy sprinted across the car park, clutching the bag to his chest. Out of nowhere, a police car that had been parked farther down suddenly flipped on its lights and officers jumped out, yelling for him to stop. Everything turned chaotic instantly. The guy dodged between cars. Officers chased him. People from the street turned their heads. She kept shouting things I couldn't understand, gripping the side of her car like she didn't know whether to run or collapse. I just stood there frozen, hands shaking, heart slamming against my ribs. An officer rushed past me, telling me to step back. The whole thing happened so fast it barely made sense. The guy got tackled near the exit, officers dragging him down while he kicked and yelled. They ripped the backpack out of his arms and cuffed him while he kept screaming that she was supposed to take it somewhere safe. That was the first moment I realized this wasn't random at all. This wasn't a mugging. This wasn't bad timing. This was planned. Just not the part involving me. 2 officers walked back toward us, one carrying the backpack with gloves on. She went silent the second they approached. Completely silent. Her eyes locked on the bag, not on me, not on the broken glass, not on the officers. On the bag. One officer asked me to step aside. I did. My legs felt jelly-like, numb and heavy at the same time. He asked who I was, how I knew her, whether I touched the backpack. I told him everything, where we met, that we were on a first date, that all I carried were the tote bags, not the backpack. He nodded, taking notes. Then they opened the backpack. I don't know what I expected. Maybe clothes, maybe electronics, maybe nothing. But inside were boxes. Boxes still sealed. Jewelry cases. Watches. A small velvet pouch of coins. Even a folded store security tag remover. The officer said one sentence that made my whole body go cold. These items matched descriptions from multiple burglaries tonight. I looked at her. She looked at the ground. The officer explained it in pieces, bits of info that made everything rearrange in my head like some sick jigsaw puzzle. She wasn't shopping earlier. She'd been breaking into houses. Her and the guy worked together. The backpack was the stash. They planned to meet up after the jobs. But something went wrong and she panicked. So she set up a date. Not to relax. not to have fun, not to meet someone new, to live normal, to look occupied, to avoid suspicion. I was her cover story. The officer said they'd been tracking the other guy already, which is why the police car was nearby. They didn't expect her to be involved until the moment he smashed the window and called her by her real name. They questioned her on the spot. She tried denying it, then tried blaming the guy, and tried saying she didn't know what was in the bag, but the officers weren't buying it. They told her witnesses had seen two people earlier, one matching her exact clothing. Her legs buckled when they cuffed her. She didn't look at me once. Not when she was questioned. Not when the officers found the stolen stuff. Not when they led her away. I stood by my car long after they drove her and the guy off. The car park felt emptier than before, colder somehow. The glass from her window sparkled all over the ground, making the whole scene look unreal. I kept thinking about how easily I carried her bags. How easily I stood beside her car. How easily I could have been blamed. How easily she pulled me into a night that wasn't mine at all. I didn't even know her real name until the officer said it out loud. That's the part that stays with me. I wasn't a date. I was a decoy. I still can't believe I said yes to hanging out at someone's workplace. Thinking back now, that alone should have been weird enough, but he made it sound casual, almost fun. He kept saying his office had this chill break room, comfy sofas, free snacks, a huge projector he used after hours. He said no one would be there that late and it'd be quiet, private, perfect for a first date if we didn't feel like dealing with bars or crowds. The way he sold it made it sound like a vibe, not a red flag. I met him outside the building around 7. It looked normal enough, just a medium-sized office with tinted windows and a faded sign. Nothing scary. The parking lot was almost empty except for his car and a few random ones left overnight. He used his card to unlock the front door, glancing behind him like he didn't want anyone seeing. I didn't think much of it, convinced myself he was just being cautious. The inside smelled like carpet cleaner and stale vending machine snacks. The lights were dimmed, just a glow from the hallway and the soft hum of computers left in sleep mode. He told me to follow him upstairs to the break room. The whole way there, he kept walking a little too fast, turning corners like he was checking if someone was around. Again, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. People act weird at their jobs sometimes. The break room was actually nice. Big sofa, a mini fridge, a microwave, some arcade-style thing in the corner. He tossed me a bottle of water from the fridge and sat beside me, talking about his shifts, his annoying coworkers, and random things he liked. It felt comfortable for a while. I even joked about how strange it was to be on a date in an empty office, and he laughed like it was the most normal thing ever. But the longer we sat there, the more I started noticing small things that didn't add up. His backpack was weirdly full for a simple after-work hangout. He kept checking his watch, way more than someone on a date should. Whenever the building made a noise, pipes, AC, whatever, he tensed like he was ready to jump out of his skin. After about half an hour, he suggested we move to his office because it had comfier chairs. I followed him down another hallway that felt colder and darker than the rest of the building. He unlocked a door and flicked on a lamp. The room wasn't big, just a desk, 2 chairs, shelves, and boxes stacked oddly near the window. Boxes that didn't look like normal office stuff. Boxes that were half-taped, marked with random letters, no labels, no company branding. Some were stacked to hide others. Some were shoved behind the desk like he didn't want anyone to see them unless they walked fully inside. I didn't want to snoop, but the whole setup felt wrong. He quickly sat down in a way that blocked the boxes from my view and pulled his backpack onto his lap. He didn't open it. He didn't put it down. He just held it like it was precious. I asked if he was okay. He said he was fine, but his voice cracked halfway through. Before I could ask anything else, the building went silent, like completely silent. No hum of computers, no AC, nothing. Then, out of nowhere, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Not slow, not casual. Fast. Purposeful. Too many to be normal. He went pale. Not scared pale. Guilty pale. He whispered, "No, no, not now," under his breath, and grabbed the edges of his chair like he needed to anchor himself. I stood up, confused. heart pounding even though I didn't know what was happening yet. Then the pounding started. Not footsteps. Fists slamming on the office door. Loud, commanding, booming through the whole room. He froze. I froze. The door burst open so hard it hit the wall. Officers flooded into the office with flashlights and commands, shouting for him to stand up, drop the bag, move away from the desk. I couldn't even breathe. I backed into the corner with my hands visible because the last thing I wanted was to get mistaken for whatever he was involved in. They grabbed him before he even thought about running. The backpack hit the floor, spilling open slightly, and inside were small boxes, security tags, metal tools, and cables wrapped together. The kind of stuff people use to break down machines or steal parts. 2 officers went straight to the stacked boxes behind the desk. They opened one and pulled out expensive equipment, monitors still in packaging, projectors, tablets, things that definitely weren't supposed to be in his office. One officer said they've been tracking stolen items from the building for weeks. Another said the CCTV finally caught him carrying boxes after hours. Another said they'd been watching the building tonight, expecting him to take more. I felt sick. The date wasn't a date. I was an excuse. He brought me here so he wouldn't look suspicious being inside after hours. He thought bringing someone made him seem innocent. He thought if anyone saw him, they'd assume he was just showing his workplace to a date. I kept repeating that I didn't know anything. One officer told me to calm down and asked how long I'd known him. I said a week. He nodded like he'd heard that answer before from other people dragged into crimes they didn't sign up for. The whole time, my date refused to look at me. He stared at the floor while they cuffed him, breathing hard, mumbling things like it wasn't supposed to go like this. Supposed. As if I'd ruined his plan by being there. As if my presence was only useful until it wasn't. The officers searched every corner of the office, pulling out more stolen equipment. I stood outside in the hallway, shaking, listening to radios crackle and boxes being opened. One officer eventually came to me and explained everything properly. He hadn't stolen something once. He'd been stealing for months. Taking expensive items piece by piece and hiding them in different offices, planning to move them all out at once. Tonight was supposed to be the night he collected the last batch. And I was supposed to be his cover. They finally let me go and they cleared me, but my legs were so weak I could barely walk down the stairs. The building felt colder, emptier, haunted by the fact that I'd been sitting comfortably next to someone who was literally robbing his workplace under my nose. I got outside, and the whole street felt too quiet. I didn't even look back at the building in case someone else came up. I still can't believe he smiled at me like nothing was wrong. Like he didn't walk me straight into a crime scene. I swear the only reason I'd even agreed to this date was because it sounded harmless. Bowling. The least threatening place in the world. Neon lights, shoes that smell weird, families arguing over bumpers, kids running around with slushies. Nothing scary ever happens in a bowling alley. That was exactly why I said yes. I wanted a calm night, something light, something that didn't feel like a trap. I got there early, stood outside the entrance trying to look normal while pretending to scroll my phone. The place was busy, music pulsing through the windows, that familiar mix of fried food and cleaning spray drifting out every time the door opened. The sky was already dark, but the car park was bright with orange lights, cars pulling in and out like any normal weekend. She messaged me saying she was parking and would be there in a minute. I felt weirdly excited because she seemed chill over text. No strange vibes, no weird questions. She just liked bowling and wanted something fun. Then I walked inside, and everything instantly felt wrong. 2 detectives were standing near the counter, not dressed like officers, but you could just tell. The jackets, the stance, the way they were scanning the room without acting like they were. One was talking quietly to the manager while the other kept watching the door. Nobody else seemed to notice, but the air shifted in that way you can't explain. My stomach tightened, even though I had no idea why. I tried to ignore it. I went to the counter to check the lane booking. The manager looked stressed, glancing back at the detectives every few seconds. He handed me the shoes with shaky hands like he was distracted. I sat down to lace them up, still trying to calm myself. I told myself maybe they were looking for someone who came earlier. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just unrelated coincidence. And then she walked in. She looked breathless, like she jogged the last bit of the way. Her hair was slightly messy, Her jacket wasn't zipped properly, and she kept wiping her hands on her jeans like she touched something she wanted to forget. But she smiled when she saw me. A shaky smile, but still a smile. I stood up to wave her over. The detectives turned at the exact same second. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. Their eyes went straight to her, not to me, not around us, directly to her. My heart dropped into my stomach. She didn't see them yet. She was still smiling, walking toward me like nothing was wrong. I heard one detective mutter something into his radio. The manager whispered, "That's her," but not loud enough for her to hear. I had no clue what was happening. I didn't even have time to react. She reached me and opened her mouth to say hi, but before she could finish the word, the detective stepped forward fast and blocked her path. Her whole face collapsed. Not confused. Not scared. Caught. One detective asked her to come with them. She instantly tried to act innocent, asking what was going on, pretending she was shocked, even looking at me like she wanted me to back her up. I just stood there, frozen, feeling like I'd walked into someone else's problem. They told her they had footage, that a car matching hers had been involved in a hit and run less than 10 minutes earlier, that witnesses gave a description of someone who looked exactly like her getting out of the driver's seat and running from the scene, that the car was parked crooked outside right now, still warm. Her reaction didn't match any innocent person's reaction ever. She didn't deny being in the area. She didn't ask how they found her. She didn't even look surprised they knew of her car. All she said was that she was here for a date, and the timing made no sense. She kept repeating that phrase, "here for a date," louder and louder, like saying it enough times would make her clean. She pointed at me, saying she'd been planning this for days, that she'd been with me, that she couldn't have been anywhere else. And that's when it hit me like a punch to the chest. She wasn't trying to date me. She was trying to use me. She needed an alibi. She needed to be seen. She needed to walk into a public place exactly when she did. I was supposed to say she'd been with me the whole time. I was supposed to back her up without knowing what she'd done. I was supposed to lie for her just by existing near her. The detective turned to me and asked how long I'd been with her. My voice cracked when I said I'd only just seen her walk through the door 30 seconds ago. I barely looked at her because the guilt on her face made my skin crawl. She tried to interrupt me, saying we messaged all day, saying I knew she was coming early, saying she'd been on the way for ages, trying to twist the narrative right in front of me. The detective shut her down immediately. He told her they had her car's movements tracked, that she'd abandoned the scene, that someone badly hurt was being treated right now, that lying would only make everything worse. She went quiet, completely silent, the kind of silence that isn't shock, it's surrender. The detectives cuffed her right there in front of everyone. People stopped bowling. Kids stared. One guy dropped a pizza slice on his shoe. She didn't fight back. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at me like I betrayed her for telling the truth. As if I owed her anything. As if she didn't try to turn me into her cover. One detective stayed behind to question me. My hands were shaking so badly I had to hold the edge of the counter. He asked how we met, how long we'd been talking, whether she mentioned anything about driving there. I answered everything honestly because I was terrified of even sounding unsure. He finally told me the part that made my stomach flip upside down. They found messages on her phone to a friend saying she just needed to be seen somewhere busy and she'd pick some guy to meet. Some guy. I wasn't a date. I was a strategy. The detective told me I could go after they cleared me. I sat in my car for 10 minutes staring at the steering wheel before I could even put the keys in. The image of her being let out in cuffs replayed like a glitch in my mind over and over. I still can't look at bowling alleys the same way.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
I swear this one still messes with my head the most because nothing about the start of the day felt wrong. It actually felt sweet. Like one of those wholesome dates people post about online where everything goes soft and slow and cute. He picked me up in this beat-up little car that smelled like old air freshener and crisp, but he was smiling so much I didn't care. He kept saying he had a surprise spot planned and that I'd love it because it was quiet and peaceful. I thought he meant a normal park or some hidden public place. Something harmless. We drove for like 20 minutes, past shops, past houses, past the main roads, until everything started looking more like countryside than town. He kept saying we were almost there, randomly humming like someone who was too excited about something he said of himself. I remember leaning back in the seat thinking maybe he actually put effort into this. Maybe this guy actually wanted to make a good memory. Finally, he turned down this narrow dirt road lined with tall bushes. The path looked forgotten, uneven, like cars weren't supposed to be there. The whole place felt weirdly quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring a little. He parked the car beside this huge open field that stretched out way farther than I expected. Tall grass, a few scattered trees, a small wooden gate that looked more decorative than functional. It was pretty, but in that abandoned way. He grabbed a blanket from the boot and acted all proud of himself, like he brought me to some secret romantic place no one else knew about. We walked into the field, and he spread the blanket near one of the trees. The sun was hitting everything at this warm golden angle, and for a second I actually thought the spot was cute. Weird, but cute. He kept talking about how he came here all the time when he needed quiet. How he liked thinking here. How nobody ever disturbed him. I didn't question it. People have favorite places all the time. I sat down and we started talking about random things. Films, school memories. Food we hated. He kept looking around though, scanning the field every few minutes. Not nervously, just watching, like he wanted to make sure something wasn't happening yet. Then I started noticing details. There were no paths worn into the grass, no signs of picnics, no benches, no bins. The wooden gate had a lock on it even though it was half broken, and the more I looked around, the more the whole field felt too quiet for a place meant for visitors. I asked him who owned the land. He said it was complicated. That was the moment my stomach tightened a bit. We kept talking, but he couldn't sit still. He kept shifting, checking his phone, glancing toward the car. At one point he even muttered something under his breath about timing. When I asked what he said, he pretended he didn't hear me. Half an hour passed, and as I was opening a packet of crisps, I saw two figures in the distance. At first I thought it was just hikers coming down the hill or dog walkers. But the closer they got, the more serious they looked. Uniforms, badges, radios, walking straight toward us with this deliberate stride that didn't match the lazy countryside vibe at all. My date saw them too, and that's when his whole vibe changed. His whole body went stiff. He whispered "not today" under his breath and started folding the blanket so fast it didn't even make sense. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't answer. He just kept glancing at the approaching officers like he was trying to calculate where to run. By the time the officers reached us, he was already standing, half turned toward the gate like he planned to sprint for it. One officer called out his name. His real name. A name he never told me. He froze. The other officer stopped beside me and asked me calmly if I was with him. I said yes because what was I supposed to say? I asked what was happening, but he didn't answer straight away. Instead, he told me to stand a little farther back away from the guy, like I was at risk and didn't know it yet. The first officer told him he'd been warned about coming here, that he'd been told repeatedly this was private land, that he'd been trespassing for weeks, that he was caught on cameras ignoring warnings, that the owner had already filed complaints and asked for charges. My date kept shaking his head, ranting that he wasn't hurting anything, that he wasn't even doing anything wrong, that he just wanted the place to himself. His voice cracked halfway through like he was about to cry or break something. I stood there confused out of my mind. I asked what they meant by trespassing, and one officer finally explained. The field wasn't a public spot, not a park, not a nature reserve, not a picnic area. It was someone's private land, farmland that wasn't currently in use, and my date had been sneaking onto it for weeks, climbing the gate, sitting on the owner's property, ignoring every notice they left. He wasn't bringing me to some romantic hidden gem. He was bringing me to a place he had no right to be. A place he'd already been caught on multiple times. The officer said the owner had seen us on the camera and called immediately, thinking he'd brought someone else to trespass with him again. That's why they showed up so fast. I felt sick. Everything he told me was a lie. The whole "I come here all the time" thing. A lie. The idea that it was peaceful. Only peaceful because he wasn't supposed to be there. The way he kept checking around the field. Not romantic, he was paranoid. The reason he kept looking at the gate, he was expecting police. The officers told me I didn't have to worry, but they had to question me just to make sure I wasn't involved. I told them everything. How he said it was his spot. How he bragged about coming here. How I had no idea it was private land. They believed me immediately. They didn't believe him. They handcuffed him right there in the grass while he kept complaining that it wasn't a big deal, that he wasn't hurting anyone, that he deserved the space more than the actual owner because he appreciated it more. That part scared me more than anything. The entitlement. The way he looked at me like I'd ruined his perfect plan by existing. The officers walked him back to the car while I stood frozen beside the blanket still half folded on the grass. They told me I could leave once they took my statement. I kept staring at the field, suddenly realizing it wasn't peaceful. It was empty. Isolated. Perfect for someone who wanted control over a place that didn't belong to him. I kept thinking about how he brought me there to impress me, and how close I came to being stuck alone with him in someone else's land miles from anything or anyone. I don't trust secret spots anymore. I swear the whole thing still feels like a prank someone forgot to tell me about. The night started off calm, stupidly calm, the type of calm that tricks you into thinking nothing bad could possibly happen. She invited me to her Airbnb apartment for our date because she said she liked hosting and wanted something chill instead of loud bars or crowded restaurants. She sent me the address, told me to come around 8, and I didn't overthink any of it. The building looked normal from the outside. Not fancy, not run down, just an average block with cheap outdoor lights and a buzzer system that only worked when you held it down a certain way. She buzzed me immediately, almost too fast, like she was standing right there waiting for my call. The hallway smelled like cleaning spray mixed with damp carpets, but that didn't throw me off. Most flats like this smell the same. She opened the door to the unit before I'd even knocked. She looked excited and a bit rushed, like she'd been running around tidying before I arrived. The place looked decent at first glance. Trendy lamps, fluffy cushions, random prints on the walls that looked like they came from some generic art website. It had that staged look of one of those flats you scroll past in listings where everything is nice but nothing feels like it belongs to an actual person. I complimented the place and she laughed nervously, saying she loved temporary spaces. I didn't know what that meant, so I didn't ask. She moved weirdly fast, picking up cups, adjusting blankets, hiding things under the sofa. I thought she was just stressed about making a good impression. She offered me a drink, and we sat at this tiny dining table near the kitchen. The conversation felt normal enough. Work, childhood, why she hated clubs, random nonsense. She kept glancing at the door, though. Not in a scared way, more like she was expecting someone or timing something in her head. She also kept checking her phone like she was waiting for messages she didn't want me to see. Little things started standing out. There were 3 suitcases stacked by the sofa, even though she claimed she was staying there for a month. The fridge was almost empty, 1 juice bottle, and a single takeout container. None of the cupboards had plates or glasses except the 2 she set out. The wardrobes were open slightly, and inside weren't clothes, just random boxes and crumpled bedsheets. And there was this printed list taped inside a kitchen cabinet door with different names next to dates. I only saw it for a second before she slammed the cabinet shut, laughing it off and saying something about meal planning charts. I didn't buy it, but I didn't want to look nosy. I shook left when she started whispering to someone through the bedroom door. She didn't know I heard her because she turned up the music. It wasn't a full conversation, just quick, sharp exchanges like she was telling someone to be quiet or move something. I sat at the table pretending to scroll my phone while the hairs on my arms slowly stood up. Then she came back acting like nothing happened. I tried to ignore it, tried to relax, tried to convince myself I wasn't trapped in the wrong flat with the wrong person at the wrong time. But then the knock came. Not a polite tap. A hard, heavy slam that made the whole flat vibrate. She froze instantly, her face drained a ball color. She whispered, "Don't move," in a shaky voice and backed away from the table. Another bang. This time louder. The kind of knock that makes your bones tense. I stood up because my instincts were screaming at me to understand what was happening. She looked at me like she wanted to warn me about something but couldn't get the words out. And then the door burst open. The frame didn't even stand a chance. Officers flooded into the flat like they rehearsed the route. Tactical gear, radios buzzing, torches flashing across walls and furniture. They shouted commands I couldn't process. One officer pinned me back against the wall while another grabbed her before she could even think about running. I kept saying I didn't know what was going on. My voice sounded hot and cracked, like it wasn't mine. The officer demanded to know who I was. I told him my name, told him I was here for a date, told him I wasn't involved in anything. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if I was lying. Meanwhile, they dragged out two guys from the bedroom, guys I didn't even know were there. They looked rough, sweaty, like they'd been arguing or packing in a panic. One of them cursed when he saw the officers. The other tried to explain, but nobody listened. One officer shouted that the property wasn't theirs. Another yelled something about illegal short-term rental operations. Another mentioned stolen keys. Another said they'd been switching locks between stays. Everything hit me at once. She didn't live there. She never booked it. She wasn't renting it at all. She and her friends had been breaking into empty Airbnb units, changing the codes and running their own fake rental scam, filling the place with random decor they stole or borrowed, listing it online under different names, then moving before the real owner noticed. They weren't just crashing there. They were running an entire scam out of it. And I walked straight into the middle of it with a smile on my face thinking she wanted a cozy date. One officer pulled me aside after checking my ID. He told me quietly to stay calm, that they just needed to confirm I wasn't part of the scam, that I wasn't one of the fake renters, that I wasn't helping them. They showed me photos on a clipboard, pictures of fake listings, screenshots of complaints from travelers, lists of stolen items. I felt sick. I kept repeating that I didn't know anything, that I just met her, that I didn't even know her real full name. Eventually, after checking my story and confirming I hadn't been there before, they cleared me. But they still led me outside like I was made of glass. The street was filled with flashing lights. Neighbors stared from their windows. Officers carried bags of evidence out of the building. I saw them handcuff her as they loaded her into the back of the van. She didn't look at me. Not once. I just stood there in the cold night air, feeling like I'd been dropped into someone else's crime scene. I couldn't believe how close I'd been to getting arrested over a date that wasn't even going that well. I went home with the smell of that flat stuck to my clothes and the sound of officers shouting stuck in my head. I don't go to people's Airbnbs anymore. He was already sitting at one of those high tables near the railing, waving at me with this casual smile like he'd been waiting forever. He looked calm, confident, relaxed in a way that made you trust him instantly. Clean shirt, neat hair, the type of guy your friends would say seems safe before even knowing him. I walked over and the view behind him looked unreal. Tall buildings, moving lights, the whole city stretched out like a blurred painting. He made some joke about the menu being overpriced, and we laughed like we'd known each other longer than a week. He asked about my day, where I lived, what shifts I worked, what bank I used, and at the time those questions blended into the conversation like harmless small talk. People ask random stuff on dates all the time. The drinks came, glowing under the dim lights, and we talked about everything from childhood memories to awful school stories. I didn't notice how many details about my life I was spilling without thinking. I didn't notice how he listened to the boring parts more carefully than the fun ones. I didn't notice how often he circled back to things like my address history or how long I had my phone number. I just thought he was being attentive. The rooftop got busier as the night went on. People laughed loud. Some took photos against the skyline. Couples leaned on the railing pretending they were in a film. The whole vibe was warm and dreamy. It made me feel like I could let my guard down. And I did. Until everything snapped in the space of a minute. I remember him standing to order another drink. He walked toward the bar with this easy stride, blending into the crowd for a second. I was scrolling through my phone when someone bumped the table and I looked up. Two officers in plain clothes walked onto the rooftop. Not rushing, not shouting. Just walking with that serious posture that makes your stomach twist. They scanned the place like they were checking faces one by one. The music suddenly felt quieter, even though it didn't change. Then one of them locked eyes with him. The shift in the air was instant. Before he could take another step, the officers moved in. Fast. They grabbed his arms, one officer blocking him from turning, the other pulling him away from the bar. Chairs scraped. People gasped. Drinks spilled, but he didn't yell or fight. He just froze. Like he'd been expecting this exact moment. I stood up without thinking, hands shaking, heart pounding so hard it felt like it echoed in my ears. I kept saying what's happening, what's going on, why are you taking him, but nobody looked at me. The officers didn't raise their voices, they didn't explain anything yet. They just read him something quietly and guided him toward the lift. I took a step forward, but another officer, who I didn't even realize was there, blocked me gently with his arm. He asked my name. I told him. He asked how I knew the guy. I said we matched online a week ago. He asked how long we'd been talking. I said not long. He asked if he'd asked for any personal info. That's when my stomach finally dropped. The officer believed me, but he still looked at me with this pitying expression that made my skin crawl. He asked if he could check something quickly and pulled out a small folder with printed photos. Not crime scene stuff, nothing violent, just faces. Women. Different ages, different races, different styles. Every one of them looked like a normal person on a normal day. Every one of them had gone on dates with him. Every one of them had been used. The officer explained it slowly, like he didn't want to freak me out too fast. The guy wasn't a kidnapper or some dramatic criminal. He was something quieter, scarier, more calculated. He used women's identities. Not their handbags, not their cards, their entire identities. He'd take women on dates, charm them, get bits of personal info without them noticing, old addresses, phone numbers, schools they went to, full names, little background details people share without thinking. Then he'd use all that to open accounts, take loans, make purchases, commit fraud under their names. Sometimes he applied for flats using their information. Sometimes he took out phone contracts and disappeared. Sometimes he sold their identities to other people. And the worst part, he always stopped talking to them right after the date. Because once he had enough info, he didn't need them anymore. The officer told me quietly, almost apologetically, that my date had asked about more details tonight than the average person shares in a month. He was building a profile in his head, step by step, casually. The next part made my whole body freeze. He had already started one under my name. The officer showed me a screenshot of a partially completed application they found on his laptop during a previous search. It had my first name, the area I lived in, my age, the network my phone used, my job. All things I've mentioned without realizing how dangerous those details were in the wrong hands. He only needed a few more pieces. That's why he asked what bank I used. That's why he asked how long I lived at my place. That's why he asked if my phone contract was old or new. He wasn't getting to know me. He was building me. A version of me that he could control on paper. A version of me he could use. The officers explained they'd been tracking him for months, but never caught him in public before. Tonight they finally got the alert they needed. Someone he scammed recognized him in a shop earlier and called the police. I stood there shaking, staring at the empty chair he'd been sitting in minutes earlier, playing every harmless question he asked. Every time he leaned in closer. Every time he acted interested. Every time I thought the date was going well. He wasn't flirting. He was studying. The officer told me they stopped him just in time. Apparently he usually got all the info he needed by the end of the first date. I was minutes away from being next. When they finally let me leave, I couldn't even walk straight. The lift ride down felt like dropping through the floor. The street outside felt loud and too bright. I kept checking my phone like he might somehow still be in it. I went home and canceled everything. I've never answered questions on a date the same way again. I don't think I'd ever gone from relaxed to terrified so fast in my life. The whole thing still feels unreal when I replay it in my head, like I stepped into someone else's nightmare without noticing. The date started off stupidly normal. Too normal. One of those evenings where nothing feels dramatic, nothing feels threatening, and you actually think the day might go well for once. We met at this little restaurant near town, the kind with warm lights, wooden tables, and menus that try too hard to look fancy. I got there first and sat by the window, pretending not to be checking my phone every 20 seconds. She walked in wearing a long jacket, smiling like she'd sprinted the whole way there. She looked excited, out of breath, and a bit jittery, but I thought it was just nerves. We talked for a while, and everything flowed easily. She laughed at my dumb jokes, leaned forward when she spoke, played with the straw in her drink like she was trying to calm her hands. I didn't notice anything strange yet. She asked a lot about my job, my schedule, whether I lived alone, what phone I had. I thought she was just curious. First dates are full of pointless questions anyway. Then she asked if she could borrow my phone. She said her battery had died and she needed to message her sister. It didn't sound weird. People forget to charge their phones all the time. She held out her hand casually, and like an idiot, I just gave it to her. Didn't even think twice. She smiled, thanked me, and said she'd be back in a second because she wanted to step into the bathroom where it was quieter. I watched her walk away, still relaxed, still clueless. I didn't think anything beyond maybe she was checking something personal. She took her time, though. Not suspiciously long, but long enough for me to glance at the bathroom door a couple times. I tried to stay normal. I sipped my drink. I scrolled through the menu again, even though I already chose what I wanted. I even rehearsed what I'd say when she came back, because I hate awkward pauses. Then she returned, smiling like nothing happened, handing my phone back gently. She apologized for taking so long and acted like everything was perfectly fine. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look guilty. She just slipped her jacket off and started talking again like she hadn't just borrowed the only device with my entire identity on it. I didn't check my phone immediately. I didn't want to look rude. I just put it on the table and kept talking. That's when everything snapped. The front door of the restaurant opened with this sudden heaviness that made everyone look up. 2 officers walked in, not rushing, not shouting, just scanning the room with this focused intensity that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The manager stepped aside nervously. People put their forks down. The whole room went silent. One officer held a phone in his hand. My lock screen. My wallpaper. My name. My heart dropped so hard I swear it rattled my ribs. They approached our table without hesitation. One of them asked my name. I said yes, confused and already shaking. He told me to stand up slowly. I kept asking what was going on, but he didn't answer at first. He just asked if this was my phone. I said yes. He asked if I'd sent a message recently. I said no, not since before the date. Then he showed me the screen. My number. My phone. A message sent 20 minutes ago. And the message was insane. Threatening. Demanding money. Telling someone they had until the end of the night to transfer $3,000 or something bad would happen. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough to make me feel sick. I'd never typed those words. I'd never even seen the number it was sent to. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. I couldn't even form a full sentence. The officer told me the person who received the message had reported it immediately, claiming someone was trying to extort them. The number used was traced back to me, my phone, my identity. My date sat completely still beside me. Not scared. Not confused. Not protesting. Just still. Too still. The officer told me the message was sent from inside this restaurant, that the timestamp lined up exactly with when she took my phone. He asked again if I'd sent anything. I kept repeating no. My voice barely came out. My hands were shaking so violently I had to hold onto the table to steady myself. The officers didn't cuff me, but they kept their distance like they weren't ruling anything out yet. I pointed at her, voice cracking, saying she got my phone earlier. She finally spoke, pretending to be confused, saying she only messaged her sister and didn't do anything else. Her face didn't match her words. Her eyes were wide, not in fear, but in calculation, like she was doing maths in her head, like she was figuring out if she could talk her way out of this. The officer asked to see her own phone. She hesitated. Tiny, barely noticeable, but enough. He told her to hand it over. She did slowly, gripping it too tight before releasing it. They checked her recent activity, her recent calls, her browser tabs. They found nothing directly linking her, but the timing was too perfect, too deliberate. Then the restaurant manager came over, saying she'd gone into the bathroom with my phone for at least 4 minutes. The officer wrote it down. He asked her again if she'd sent anything. She kept denying it, but her voice was trembling now. She kept glancing toward the exit like she was waiting for the right moment to bolt. I felt frozen in my own body. The officer asked me to unlock my phone. I did. He went through the messages, checking the sent folder, the timestamps, the typing patterns, the spelling, the structure. None of it looked like something I'd write. He asked me if I knew the person she messaged. I said I'd never heard of them in my life. He asked if I had any reason to extort someone. I almost laughed out of panic because the whole thing was so far from anything I'd ever do. Finally, the officer stepped aside to talk quietly. My date sat silent. She wasn't moving. Wasn't blinking enough. Wasn't acting like someone innocent. Then one officer came back and asked her to stand. She asked why, but her voice cracked before she finished the sentence. They told her she was being detained on suspicion of using another person's device to commit an offense. She stood up slowly like her bones were made of glass. The moment they touched her arm, she snapped. She didn't scream. She didn't fight wildly. She just tried to yank her arm away and run. But they were faster. They held her firmly, guiding her outside while a whole restaurant stared. Even then, she didn't look at me. Not once. She kept her eyes on the floor like she was embarrassed she got caught, not sorry for what she did. After she was taken out, the officer came back to me. He said it was clear I wasn't involved. He apologized for the intensity, but said they had to act fast because threats like that can't be ignored. I nodded, staring at my phone like it wasn't mine anymore. I sat there long after they left, replaying everything. Her questions. Her jittery energy. Her obsession with my phone. Her long bathroom trip. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't even stand up until the manager asked if I was okay. I keep thinking about how easy it was for her. One phone. One fake message. 1 minute in a bathroom. And a whole life could have gone sideways. I still don't know how I didn't clock it from the start. Something about him felt slightly off, not in a dramatic way, more like a background glitch you ignore because you want the date to go well. He messaged me saying he'd pick me up so we could decide where to go together. I didn't see anything wrong with that. The weather was cold, and the idea of not waiting around outside felt nice. He pulled up in this small black car that looked like it had lived through too many storms. Bits of dust on the seats, a faint smell of something burnt, and a dashboard light that kept flashing like it was begging for help. He told me he just needed to grab something from a corner shop on the way, then we could head wherever. I didn't question it. Everyone forgets things. The shop was on this quiet road with flickering streetlights and those weird uneven pavements that make you feel like you're walking on broken teeth. He parked right outside, left the engine running, and told me he'd be 2 minutes. He said it like he'd done it 1,000 times. Casual. Normal. I believed him. He walked into the shop with his hood half up, hands stuffed in his pockets. Nothing alarming, just cold weather vibes. I leaned back in the passenger seat, scrolling on my phone, trying to ignore how awkward I felt sitting alone in a stranger's car. The radio was off, the street was empty, and everything felt too quiet for no reason. After a minute, I noticed he'd been in the shop longer than he said. I checked the time. 3 minutes, 5, 7. Not long enough to panic, but enough to feel weird. I craned my neck a little, trying to see through the shop window, but the shelves blocked most of the view. I could only see the top of his hood and the cashier standing stiff behind the counter. I told myself he was just taking long because he was picking something specific. Maybe he got distracted. Maybe he saw someone he knew. Maybe he forgot what he needed. I forced myself to relax. Then everything snapped in under 10 seconds. A police car turned onto the road with no sirens, just lights. Then another from the opposite end. Then a third. All slow, all precise, all closing in around the shop. My stomach tightened instantly. They weren't speeding. They weren't dramatic. It was a quiet kind of serious that makes your heart drop. Before I could even move, one police car stopped right behind his, blocking it in. Another stopped in front. The officers stepped out fast, hands on their vests, eyes locked onto the shop like they'd been hunting it all day. One of them pointed directly at the car I was sitting in. That moment, I felt everything inside me collapse at once. They walked toward me with purpose. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Purpose. One of them gestured for me to roll down the window. I froze, still holding my phone, still trying to breathe normally. He tapped the glass and told me to unlock the door. His face wasn't angry, but it wasn't gentle either. He looked at me like I was a puzzle piece he needed to move out of the way. I stepped out slowly, my legs shaking so hard I thought I'd fall. They kept asking where he was, how long he'd been inside, if I knew what he was doing. I kept saying I didn't know anything, that he told me he needed something from the shop. One officer looked at the shop, then at another officer, and they exchanged that look, the look that says they'd already suspected what was happening long before they arrived. They told me to stand back, behind one of the cars. I could barely process anything. My brain kept looping the same phrase. Please don't let this be what it looks like. Please. Then more officers arrived. One of them went inside the shop with his hand near his belt. The door slammed behind him. I held my breath. Seconds later, shouting erupted inside. Not a fight. A confrontation. I heard the cashier yelling something, an officer yelling back. Then the sound of a struggle, shelves rattling, something heavy falling over. My whole chest felt tight. I didn't know if he was hurting someone or if they were dragging him down. Everything inside me wanted to run away, but my legs wouldn't move. Two officers burst out, dragging in between them. His hood had fallen back. His face was red. He looked sweaty, panicked, wild-eyed. Not like the calm guy who picked me up earlier. Not like someone who forgot a snack or a drink. He looked like someone who had been caught mid-crime. One officer shoved him against the patrol car, cuffing him while reading something at him. The cashier came running out next, shaking and saying he tried to force open the till when the shop was empty. He waited for a quiet moment, pretended to browse, then grabbed something from his pocket. That's when the sound of the alarm went off. The more the cashier talked, the more everything inside me twisted. Apparently my date had done this before. Same trick, same pattern. Use a date as cover. Park right outside to look normal. Leave them in the car so the engine's running. Make it seem like he's coming back in minutes. It made him look less suspicious if anyone walked past. I wasn't a date. I was camouflage. The officer came back to me with his notebook. I couldn't stop shaking. I kept apologizing even though I didn't do anything. He asked how long we'd known each other. I said a few days. He asked if he mentioned stopping at the shop beforehand. I said no. He nodded like that confirmed something. They searched his car. In the glove box, they found a black baseball cap, a pair of gloves, and a folded-up reusable bag filled with random receipts. In the backseat, tucked under the floor mat, they found a screwdriver. The officer lifted it with 2 fingers like it was toxic. I felt sick. The officer told me quietly that they've been tracking a string of small robberies in the area, same method every time, same timing, sometimes a different car. But tonight they got a tip he'd be at that shop. They didn't expect me in the front seat. They didn't know he had someone with him this time. I stood there watching them shove him into the police car. He didn't look at me. He kept shouting at the officers, claiming he didn't do anything. But he didn't deny the screwdriver. He didn't deny the attempted robbery. He didn't deny the silent alarm. When they finally let me go, my hands were still shaking so much I could barely hold my phone. I walked down the road until the lights and shouting faded. It felt like stepping out of a nightmare I didn't know I was in until the moment the police boxed us in. I still can't get over how normal he looked when he told me he'd be 2 minutes. That's all it took for everything to collapse. The whole night felt too normal at the start. The kind of normal that tricks you, makes you settle into it, makes you forget anything bad could ever happen on a first date. It was a quiet evening, nothing dramatic going on outside, nothing in my mood telling me I should stay home. She messaged me saying she didn't really feel like going out and asked if I could come over instead. She said she made food and she wanted a chilled night, nothing crazy. I didn't see the harm. I didn't want to overthink it. Plenty of people do first dates at home now. It felt casual. She sent me the address. The building looked average from the outside, a little worn out, an old buzzer system, and lights in a hallway that flickered every few seconds. I pressed her number and she buzzed me in instantly, no delay. I walked up the stairs and she opened the door before I'd even knocked, smiling like she'd been waiting right behind it. The flat looked lived in, but not in a homely way. It was tidy but strange. No pictures on the walls. No personal touches. The furniture didn't match. The sofa looked new, but the table looked old. The lamp was too fancy for the rest of the room. It didn't feel like one person decorated it. It felt like a bunch of random items thrown together last minute, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe she just moved in or didn't care about aesthetics. She kept talking fast while showing me around. She didn't show me the bedroom, just the living room and a small kitchen area. The kitchen was weirdly empty. No magnets on the fridge. No spice rack. No clutter. It looked like no one cooked there. When I pointed out the lack of food, even though she said she made dinner, she laughed and said she ordered earlier and threw the boxes out already. Her laugh was shaky, but I didn't want to judge. We sat down on the sofa, trying to get comfortable. She kept talking about random things, jumping topics like her brain was running ahead of her mouth. Her eyes flicked toward the door every few minutes. I didn't think anything serious yet, Just figured she was anxious or not used to having guests. But then I started noticing little things, like how she never took her shoes off. Like how the Wi-Fi name on my phone didn't match anything with her name in it. Like how the thermostat had a sticker with a different store name on it. And the biggest one, how she flinched every time someone walked past the flat outside, even if it was just footsteps. I kept trying to ignore it, forcing myself to relax. We talked about films, work, random useless things. She kept shifting on the sofa like she couldn't settle. Once, she picked up a picture frame on the table and quickly set it face down when she saw me glance at it. She laughed it off, saying it was old friends, but she didn't sound convincing. I was starting to feel something was wrong, that stomach buzz you get when your instincts are screaming, but you don't want to ruin the night by listening. And then the knock came. Not a soft neighborly knock, a firm, official, deliberate knock. The kind that makes the air change in a room. She froze instantly. Her eyes widened just enough for me to catch it. She whispered something under her breath that sounded like a swear, then told me not to say anything and not to move. Another knock. Louder this time. She started pacing, running her hands through her hair, looking toward the back of the flat like she was deciding whether to bolt through a window. I kept asking what was going on, but she didn't answer. She just kept saying things like, just act normal, and don't open the door. But the knocking didn't stop. It got heavier, more urgent. Whoever was outside wasn't going away. I finally stood up, trying to process what the hell was happening. She grabbed my arm, telling me to stay back, but she was shaking now. Properly shaking. Then a voice outside called her name. Not a neighbor, not a friend. An officer. He said they had a warrant. A warrant. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. Before she could stop me, the officer knocked again and told whoever was inside to open the door, or they'd force it. She backed away like she was cornered. Her face went pale. She didn't even try to explain anything anymore. She knew she was done. I opened the door because I didn't want it getting kicked off the hinges while I was standing there like an idiot. 2 officers stepped in. They didn't look confused or lost. It looked like they already knew exactly what they walked into. They looked at her first, then at me. One officer asked how long I'd been there. I said barely half an hour. He asked if I lived there. I said no. He asked if I knew the situation. I said I didn't know anything. I was just on a date. Then he handed me a paper. A warrant. With someone else's name on it. The flat belonged to a woman who hadn't lived there for months. Someone had been breaking in, staying inside without permission, changing the locks, pretending it was theirs to use. Someone had taken advantage of an empty property and turned it into their little temporary setup. And that someone was the girl who invited me in. The officer explained she'd been squatting there for weeks. Neighbors had reported seeing different lights on at strange hours. Someone heard movement when the actual tenant was supposed to be away. The building owner finally checked the cameras and saw her coming and going like she lived there. She didn't pay rent. She didn't have keys originally. She broke in. And I walked straight into it like an idiot thinking I was on a cute, quiet date. While the officers questioned her, she didn't deny anything. She didn't try to run. She didn't even cry. She just sank onto the sofa with her head in her hands like she'd been expecting this exact moment. They asked her if she knew me. She said we met online. They asked if I was involved. She said no. And they believed her because I looked way too confused to be faking it. I stood there while they escorted her out of the flat, one officer staying behind to check the rooms. He opened the picture frame she hid, and it wasn't her inside it. It was the actual tenant. A family photo. She had been living her life in someone else's space, pretending it was hers, inviting me into a life that wasn't real. When the officers finished, they told me I could leave. They said it wasn't my fault, that she probably picked me because she thought bringing someone over would make her seem normal to nosy neighbors. I walked out of that building feeling like the walls weren't real, like the ground didn't feel stable, like nothing about the night actually happened. I still can't believe I sat comfortably inside a stolen life without seeing it. I still don't know how I didn't catch on sooner. The whole date felt off from the moment he suggested we go for a drive, but I told myself to relax and just enjoy being out. It was one of those evenings where the sky looked washed out and the air felt weirdly warm for no reason. I met him outside a petrol station because he said it was easy parking, which should have been the first sign something was strange. He pulled up in this old silver car that rattled when it idled. He leaned over to unlock the door and gave me this big smile that didn't match how tired his eyes looked. I got in anyway. The inside of the car smelled like a mix of fast food and cheap air freshener, and the seats felt worn out. He talked a mile a minute at first, asking about my day, talking about random music he liked, ranting about drivers who don't indicate. Normal stuff. Too normal almost. Like he was forcing the vibe to stay light. I kept noticing how he gripped the steering wheel too hard whenever he got quiet. He didn't tell me where we were going, just said he knew a spot with a good view. I didn't argue. I just watched the houses and shops blur past the window and tried to stay calm. At first, everything felt harmless enough. He was driving through normal streets, talking about how he used to live nearby and how he had memories in the area. I didn't think anything of it. But then we passed this one house. A small brick house with a blue door and a messy garden. I didn't pay attention to it the first time. But when we passed again 5 minutes later, I felt my stomach jolt a little. I wasn't sure if it was the same house until he slowed down slightly when he drove past it. Like he wanted to look but not make it obvious. He kept glancing toward the windows. I pretended not to notice. We kept driving, but instead of going somewhere new, he looped around the estate again, and again, and again. Every time we passed that house, he did the same thing, slowed down just enough to stare without making it obvious. Except it was obvious. Painfully obvious. He tried to talk normally while doing it, but his voice kept breaking like he couldn't focus on anything except that one house. I finally asked if he was lost. He laughed too loudly and said he just liked driving. Then he started rambling about how the roads here are confusing, how he took a wrong turn, how he wasn't paying attention. None of it felt real. His voice didn't match his face. His hands tightened on the wheel every time he glanced at that house. By the fourth loop, my heart felt like it was crawling at my throat. I knew he wasn't lost anymore. He knew exactly where he was going, exactly how to get there, exactly how to circle it without drawing attention. I sat still, pretending to look at my phone while watching him from the corner of my eye. He looked angry and excited at the same time, like his brain was on fire. He bit his lip every time we turned onto the street with a blue-doored house. He leaned slightly forward in his seat like he was waiting for something to happen. The sky got darker. The streetlights flickered on. Kids headed home. Everything around us looked normal except for him. He was breathing faster now, like he was building up to something. And that's when it happened. We passed the house for what felt like the fifth or sixth time. He slowed down again, but this time someone stormed out the front door. A man. Tall, red-faced, shirt half untucked, shouting something I couldn't hear through the closed windows. He charged for the car like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. My date freaked out instantly. Not scared freaked out. Caught freaked out. He stomped the gas pedal, but before he could shoot forward, 2 officers ran out of the side gate of the house. They waved their arms, shouting for us to stop. The man who ran out pointed straight at the car, yelling louder, getting closer. I froze so hard I couldn't even move my hands. My date swore under his breath. He tried reversing, but the officers were already at the back of the car. He tried going forward, but the man stepped in front, slamming his hand on the hood. Everything exploded at once. Officers yanked the door open on his side before he could lock it. He tried pushing them off, but 2 more officers ran over from across the street. The man kept shouting, pointing at him, yelling that he was back again, that he'd been circling for days, that he needed to be arrested. I didn't understand any of it. The officers pulled my date out of the car, wrestling him onto the ground. He didn't fight hard. He fought like someone who already expected this to happen, like he didn't care about being caught anymore. While they pinned him down, one officer came to my side of the car. He opened my door gently, like he didn't want to freak me out even more. He asked me to step out slowly and move away from the vehicle. My legs felt like jelly. I didn't know whether to cry or faint or run. I kept asking what was happening. He told me to wait. The man from the house was pacing, still yelling. I caught pieces of what he was saying. Things about how my date had been stalking his ex for months. How he had broken things, left notes, waited outside her job. How he wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this street. How he'd been driving past every night pretending he was lost. And I, the idiot who just wanted a normal date, had been unknowingly sitting next to him while he circled the house like some sick warm-up. The officer finally explained that they'd been monitoring the area because the ex filed multiple reports. They had alerts set up. Neighbors were watching too. The guy had been spotted around the house before. Tonight, it caught his car looping again. The officers had been hiding out waiting for him to slip. And when he showed up, he didn't come alone. He brought me. The officer said I wasn't in trouble, but I still felt guilty somehow. Like my presence had made everything worse. Like I was part of his twisted plan without knowing. Maybe he thought bringing someone would make him look less suspicious. Maybe he thought I'd be a shield. I remember looking at him when the officers lifted him off the ground. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't look scared. He stared at the house with this burning look, like he wasn't done, like he didn't care he got caught, like he'd been waiting for a reaction from the man, not from me. They put him in the car and drove him away. The man from the house kept pacing. The officers asked me more questions. I answered everything with my voice shaking. I didn't leave until they told me it was safe to go. I walked home feeling like my skin didn't fit anymore. I still think about how close we were to that house, how many times we passed it, how I sat there clueless while he stared at the windows waiting for someone to walk out. I don't go on drives with strangers anymore. I still remember how excited I was walking into that mall, and thinking about that now just annoys me. It was one of those huge shopping centers with shiny floors, way too many lights, and music playing from every store at once. Weekends always feel loud, crowded, and a bit chaotic, but I didn't mind. I hadn't been on a date in a while, and meeting someone in a public place felt safer than going somewhere quiet. We agreed to meet near the fountain because it was easy to find. I got there early and leaned on the railing pretending to look relaxed. People kept walking past holding massive shopping bags like they were in some competition. The smell of cinnamon pretzels kept drifting around, mixing with perfume clouds escaping from stores. It all felt normal in that busy mallway. She texted saying she was 2 minutes away. I waited, checking my phone every few seconds like some nervous kid. When she finally appeared, she walked fast, weaving through people with her head down. The first thing I noticed was how out of breath she looked. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair messy, and she kept gripping her tote bag like she thought someone was going to snatch it from her. But she smiled when she reached me, and I didn't think anything of it yet. People rush in malls all the time. She said hi quickly, almost too quickly, and then moved to stand slightly behind me, like she wanted me between her and the crowd. I tried making small talk, asking how her morning was, but she barely answered. She kept stealing glances over her shoulder. I assumed she was anxious, maybe just shy. I didn't want to judge her too fast. She asked if we could walk around instead of sitting down. She said she felt restless. I didn't mind. So we started walking through the main area, passing food places, clothing shops, and a giant electronics store blasting some pointless sale announcement. She kept sticking close to me. Not holding my arm, not touching me, just staying near, like she wanted people to think we were together. That's when things felt a little weird. Not scary yet, just strange. Every time we passed a security guard, she lowered her head or turned away. Whenever we walked past a shop window, she kept checking her reflection like she was making sure her hood was covering enough of her face. It felt off, but I tried to ignore it. I didn't want to assume anything. First dates can be awkward. Maybe she was insecure. We went to a small accessory store because she said she wanted to look at something. I was just walking behind her, checking out phone cases and pointless little gadgets. She didn't buy anything. She didn't look at anything for more than a second. She looked like she was in a rush even inside the store. At one point, she whispered that the mall was hotter than she expected and she might faint. I told her we could get some water or sit down, but she refused. She just kept glancing toward the entrance, gripping her tote bag tighter. That bag kept bothering me. It looked full but not heavy, stuffed in a weird shape. I thought maybe it was just clothes or something. I didn't think too hard about it. We stepped back into the main area, and she instantly went stiff. Her eyes widened a bit, her breath caught, and she moved closer to me like she wanted to disappear behind my shoulder. Before I could ask what was wrong, everything around us changed. Security guards started rushing in from both ends of the mall. Not running, but moving fast in that focused way people move when they're trained. Their radios were all buzzing at once. 2 guards pointed toward the middle of the walkway, right in our direction. Store workers stepped out of their doors watching the whole thing unfold. Some people backed up. Some recorded. Some kept walking like they didn't care. The girl next to me whispered something I didn't catch. Then she grabbed my wrist. Not in a romantic way. Not in a scared way. In a using way. like she wanted to anchor herself to me. Before I could even ask what she was doing, one of the guards shouted to stop her. I swear the whole mall turned to look at us. Her reaction was instant. She dropped my wrist, spun around, and bolted toward a side hallway near the toilets. She ran fast, practically knocking over a kid holding bubble tea. Her coat flew open for a split second, and I saw something inside her tote bag. Bright packaging. Lots of it. She kept running. Security sprinted after her. I stood frozen in the middle of the mall with 100 eyes on me, wondering what universe I had stepped into. I barely even knew her. She had spent maybe 10 minutes with me, and now security thought I was with her. The guards who didn't chase her came straight to me, asking who she was, how long I'd been with her, if I knew what she had taken. What she had taken. That's when everything clicked in my head at once. The stuffed tote bag, the way she kept hiding her face, the way she kept looking behind her, the way she stayed close to me like she wanted to vanish into the background. She hadn't been nervous for the date. She'd been trying to blend in. With me. She shoplifted something before meeting me and thought pretending to be someone's date would make her look innocent. I swear my face went numb. I told the guards everything. How we just met. How she barely talked. How I had no idea she took anything. They checked cameras, asked me more questions, confirmed I wasn't involved, and even apologized for the tension. But that didn't erase how shaken I felt standing there. They eventually caught her near the loading bay behind the mall. She had ripped open part of the tote bag trying to hide the packages. It wasn't just one item. It wasn't even a handful. It was dozens. Makeup, jewelry, hair products, random tech stuff, all shoved inside like she'd been stealing for months and perfected the technique. One guard later told me she had set off 3 alarms earlier. She'd been running through the mall looking for someone to stand with so she didn't look alone and suspicious. I happened to be the first person she recognized from online. She locked onto me instantly. I walked out of the mall feeling like my insides were still shaking. I didn't even want to go home yet. I just sat in my car staring at the steering wheel thinking about how close I came to being dragged into something I didn't even do. She used me without saying a single word. And I didn't realize until the moment she sprinted away. The sun was out, the streets were busy but not overwhelming, and I actually felt calm for once. She had picked this small cafe near the station, the type that tries too hard to live vintage with mismatched chairs and plants hanging from every corner. I got there early, sat near the window, and tried to act like I wasn't nervous. First dates are always weird, but that morning didn't feel heavy at all. It felt boring in a comforting way. Until she walked in. She looked slightly different from her pictures, but not in a bad way. Just more tired, like she hadn't slept properly. Her hair was tied up in a messy knot, and she kept adjusting the front of her coat like she was hiding a stain or something. She smiled when she saw me, and for a second, everything felt fine again. She slid into the seat across from me, apologizing for being late and mumbling something about her bus being delayed. She talked fast, almost too fast, like her thoughts were running ahead of her mouth. I remember thinking she seemed restless, but I told myself it was just first date nerves. Everyone's weird for the first 10 minutes. We ordered coffees, and she barely touched hers. She kept looking at the door every time it opened. Not in a cute waiting for someone else way, but in a paranoid, twitchy way. She flinched when a spoon dropped at the counter. She tucked her coat tighter around her like she was trying to hold herself together. I tried to ease the mood by asking normal questions about her hobbies, her job, the app, anything. She answered, but never fully. Every response felt like half of a much bigger story she was trying not to say out loud. At one point she asked if I parked far. I said no, and she nodded so quickly it didn't look like a real reaction. More like she was mentally taking note of it. I didn't think anything of it until later. I should have taken everything seriously when she kept saying random stuff like, "Today's been long," or "I just needed to get away for a bit." She said it the way someone would say it after running from something. But I didn't know that yet. I just thought she had a stressful morning. Then everything snapped in half. The cafe door opened, and 2 officers walked in. Calm steps, scanning eyes. The whole atmosphere in the place shifted instantly. Not loud, not chaotic, just tense, like everyone felt the energy drop at the same time. One of them pulled out a small notebook while the other spoke to the barista quietly. I didn't think they were there for us. It never even crossed my mind. I thought maybe someone outside was causing trouble, or they were asking about CCTV for a case. Normal stuff. But then one of the officers said a description out loud. And the second he said it, she froze. He said they were looking for a woman around her height, her coat color, her age range. And it was like something inside her snapped. She didn't ask questions. She didn't act confused. She didn't even breathe properly. She stood up so fast her chair almost fell over and whispered something like, "I'm sorry," but it didn't sound like she was talking to me. It sounded like she was talking to herself. The officers looked toward our table. And she ran. Not a jog, not a panic walk. She sprinted through the side door like she already memorized every exit in the building. Her coat flared behind her, and her bag almost slipped off her shoulder. The officers shouted for her to stop and bolted after her, pushing past people and tables. The barista ducked behind the counter like he'd seen this kind of situation before. Everyone in the cafe just stared at me like I had something to do with it. I sat there completely frozen, my coffee still untouched, my heartbeat punching through my chest. I didn't know whether to follow them or stay put. Part of me wanted to chase because I wanted answers. Another part told me not to move at all. I didn't want to get tackled by accident or look guilty for something I didn't understand. The chase moved into the alley beside the cafe. I could hear footsteps, officers yelling, bins crashing, the sound of something metal hitting pavement. The whole place shook with tension for a few minutes before everything went quiet again. Then officers started walking people back inside, asking if anyone knew her, if anyone had seen her earlier, if she said anything unusual. When they got to me, I felt my throat close up. They didn't accuse me. They didn't even question me harshly. They just asked how long I'd known her. I said this was our first time meeting. They wrote it down, nodded, and told me I could leave once they got a few more details. I asked what she'd done. The officer looked at me like he wasn't sure if he should say it, but he finally did. He said she'd taken a baby earlier that morning. Not from a stranger, not from a hospital, from her ex. She had shown up at his place, waited for him to leave for work, and taken the baby while a neighbor wasn't paying attention. The neighbor saw her walking fast down the road, holding the child pressed against her coat. Her ex reported it immediately. The area was already on alert. Cafes, buses, shops, everyone got her description. And she walked into a date with me like nothing happened. The officer said they suspected she was trying to blend in by sitting somewhere public, or maybe she was planning to use my car to get away. The way she asked about my parking suddenly made sense. The oversized coat suddenly made sense too. Everything she said, everything she did, all the weird restless energy, every bit of it snapped into place and made my stomach twist. They told me they found the baby safely in a taxi she ditched 2 streets away. She tried to run on foot after leaving the child behind. She only got caught because she slipped near a delivery bike and officers grabbed her before she could sprint off again. After they finished questioning me, I walked out of the cafe in this weird haze. Everything felt louder, brighter, sharper than normal. Like the world had moved on while my brain stayed stuck at that table replaying every detail. The way she kept scanning the door. The way she held her coat like she was protecting something. The way she ran without looking back. I didn't even realize until later that my hands were shaking the entire walk home. I still think about how close I was to becoming part of her escape plan without knowing it. How easily I could have ended up in her story instead of mine. It went from boring to terrifying in the space of maybe 10 seconds. It still messes with my head how calm everything felt at the start, because looking back, there was nothing warning me anything bad was coming. No weird comments, no creepy vibes, nothing that made me want to leave. If anything, I remember thinking he seemed almost too normal. We met at this quiet restaurant he picked. Nothing fancy, not some dark hidden spot, just a place with warm lights and way too many families eating early dinners. The kind where the floor smells like garlic bread and the servers walk around pretending they love being there. I got there first and sat at a table near the window. I was scrolling on my phone trying to look relaxed, which never works, but I kept doing it anyway. He walked in a couple minutes later, jacket half zipped, hair messy in a way that didn't look intentional. He smiled quick, pulled out the chair opposite me, and sat down like we'd known each other longer than just a week of texting. I didn't mind it. I actually liked that he wasn't awkward. For the first 20 minutes, things stayed normal. We talked about random boring topics like work, films, and how overpriced everything is. He ordered drinks for both of us and kept checking his phone like he was waiting for something. But I didn't think it was weird yet. Everyone checks their phone too much on dates. Nothing new. I only started feeling off when he suddenly said he needed to take a call. He stood up fast, almost knocking his knee on the table, and stepped outside without waiting for me to say anything. I thought maybe it was something important. I watched him disappear outside the window while holding his phone to his ear. I looked out at my drink and was about to take a sip when one of the staff practically appeared out of nowhere. He placed a small plate over the top of my glass without saying anything. I blinked at him, confused, thinking maybe he'd mistaken me for someone else. Before I could ask what he was doing, another staff member walked briskly to the front door and turned the lock. I heard the click from across the room, and that's when my stomach dropped. The restaurant wasn't loud. The families were still eating. The music was low. Nothing looked dramatic. The staff were moving differently now, controlled, tense, quiet in a way that didn't match the rest of the room. I turned to look at them, and one of them mouthed something I couldn't fully hear, but I caught the shape of 2 words. Don't drink. My whole body went stiff all at once. I looked at my glass again, the plate covering it. The staff avoiding eye contact while pretending to wipe tables that were already clean. My throat started tightening because the only thing that made sense in that moment felt like the worst possible explanation. I didn't want to panic, but I could feel my pulse in my face. The manager, or at least he looked like a manager, walked toward me slowly like he didn't want to freak me out. He crouched next to my seat and spoke quietly, too quiet for anyone else to hear, but I heard every word. He said the cameras picked something up. He said they saw my date move his hand near my drink while I wasn't looking. He said they had caught him doing something similar to someone else last month, but the footage then wasn't clear enough to prove it. My skin felt like it was vibrating. I kept staring at the glass, thinking how close I'd come to drinking it. How normal everything had felt. How stupid I must have been. But then he told me not to blame myself, that they barely caught it themselves. I asked where my date was. The manager pointed toward the window and said he was still outside pretending to be on a call, but his call wasn't real. He had stepped outside after slipping something into my drink, probably waiting for it to hit me, probably expecting me to take a sip before he came back in. The manager said the staff had already called the police. They were waiting for them to arrive before letting anyone leave. That's why the door was locked. Not to trap me, to trap him. I couldn't stop staring at him through the window. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, but not saying anything. Every few seconds he glanced back into the restaurant, checking if I'd drunk anything yet. I felt sick. Not poison sick, but fear sick, like the whole world narrowed to that one glass. Within a minute, multiple cars arrived outside. Sirens off, lights flashing faintly around the corner. Officers stepped out in plain clothes first, followed by uniforms. They approached him calmly, casually, almost like they were asking for directions. Then they grabbed his arms. The moment they touched him, he tried to run. Not far. They caught him fast, but he tried. He twisted, yelled something, dropped the phone, and nearly slammed into one of the parked cars. He kept trying to pull away like someone running from fire. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't confused. He acted like someone who knew exactly why they were there. When they put him into the back of the police car, he wasn't looking at the officers. He was staring straight at me. Like he wanted to memorize my face, like he was annoyed his plan didn't work, like the only thing that bothered him about being caught was the fact I was still awake, still sitting upright, still breathing. Once they took him away, the manager finally unlocked the door and apologized over and over. He told me they'd give the footage to the police. He said they'd save the drink for testing. He even offered for me to sit in the back office until I felt safe enough to leave. I didn't want to stay anywhere in that building anymore. I felt like the walls were watching me. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. The whole walk home felt strange. The streetlights looked dimmer. The sounds of cars sounded distant. Everything felt like it was happening behind some fog my brain made to protect itself. All I could think about was how normal he had seemed, how normal the night had started, how calmly he had smiled at me like he wasn't thinking about anything dangerous. How he sat across from me planning something while I was talking about work like an idiot. I still can't drink anything I didn't see poured myself, even at places I trust. Sometimes I replay the moment I almost reached for the glass before the staff covered it. Just that half second, the space between my hand and the drink. That's the part that sticks with me the most. I swear the only reason I even agreed to see him again was because he seemed harmless in that boring, predictable way. The kind of guy who talks too much about music and sends blurry photos of his cat. Nothing about him screamed danger. Nothing even whispered it. So when he mentioned he had a studio space he worked from and asked if I wanted to check it out after we grabbed food, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it would be some messy room full of paints or lights or whatever he pretended to do. The building he took me to wasn't fancy at all. Not one of those clean creative hubs with neon signs and shiny hallways. It was some old industrial place with a dented door and a broken keypad hanging off the wall. The paint was peeling. The windows were dusty. It smelled like damp cardboard the second we stepped inside. He acted like everything was normal, chatting about how we got the space cheap and how it wasn't perfect yet, but he was working on it. I just nodded and followed him up this narrow staircase that creaked like it wanted to collapse. The hallway upstairs was long and empty, lined with metal doors that looked like storage units. He stopped halfway down and unlocked one of them. The inside looked messy, but in a harmless way at first. Boxes stacked everywhere, canvases leaning against walls, wires tangled across the floor. A random chair in the corner, a small fridge humming in a weird pattern. He told me to ignore the mess. I tried to laugh it off even though the air felt stale and a bit too warm. There was a main room with a desk and a couple of lights. Nothing scary. He kept rambling about how he was still setting things up. I wandered around while he plugged something in. Nothing felt too strange yet, but my gut kept nudging me like something was off about hiding behind all the clutter. Then I noticed the door. A small one in the back that didn't match the others. Half covered by a hanging cloth, like he didn't want people to see it. The frame looked newer than the rest of the room. The lock had scratches around it. I asked him what it was, and he answered too fast, telling me it was just storage. His voice sounded off, though, tight and rushed, like he didn't want me anywhere near it. So of course my curiosity dragged me toward it. He stepped in front of me quickly, locking the door with this nervous smile. He kept saying it was boring, that there was nothing inside worth looking at, that it was just old gear. He talked too much. He talked fast. He talked like someone trying to distract a child. The more he talked, the more obvious it became that he didn't want me opening it. He wasn't scared I'd judge him. He was scared I'd see something. And that's all it took for my spine to tighten. I didn't force it. I just backed off and walked around the main room again. But now my eyes were sharper. I noticed weird things, like how there were phone chargers plugged into every socket but no phones in sight. How there were empty phone cases scattered near the desk. How a whole drawer was filled with SIM card packets. Unopened, untouched, too many to be normal. I didn't want to panic yet, but the air felt wrong. Then I heard a faint buzz. Not from his phone, not from mine, but from behind the little door. A soft overlapping vibration, like multiple phones receiving notifications at the same time. The kind of sound you don't ever forget once you've heard it. I looked at him and he went completely still. His smile dropped like someone ripped it off his face. And that's when the world snapped. Loud bangs echoed down the hallway outside. Heavy boots hitting the floor. Voices shouting. Radios crackling. The kind of noise that doesn't sound confused or panicked. The kind that sounds like they know exactly where they're going, exactly who they're here for, exactly what they're about to kick down. His face changed instantly. Not scared, not shocked. Angry. He grabbed his jacket like he was going to bolt through the window even though we were on the second floor. I stepped back because everything in me screamed that whatever was happening had nothing to do with me and everything to do with him. Before I could even move, officers burst through the main door so hard it hit the wall. They came in fast, yelling for him to get on the ground. He didn't try to fight. He didn't try to talk. He just sank to his knees like he expected this exact moment. The whole room filled with bodies and voices and lights, and I froze in the corner because I didn't know if they thought I was part of this or just unlucky. One officer guided me away from him while others ripped open the small door in the back. And that's when I saw it. A hidden room filled with phones. Dozens and dozens of them, neatly lined up on shelves, all plugged in, screens glowing in the dark. Notifications popping up nonstop. Alarms pinging. Some cracked. Some brand new. Some with gym stickers on the cases. Rows and rows of them, charging in silence like some twisted phone graveyard. One officer said something into his radio about the location matching the signal from a locker theft ring they'd been tracking for months. Phones stolen straight out of gym lockers. Hundreds of them dumped here to be wiped, reset, and sold off. This room wasn't a studio. It wasn't creative. It wasn't a workspace. It was a stash site. And I walked straight into it on a date. Officers kept asking me questions. How I knew him, how long I'd been here, if I touched anything, if he mentioned anything weird. I told them everything. How he invited me here, how he acted normal until the banging started, how he panicked when I walked in near the tiny door. They wrote everything down fast, barely looking up. Meanwhile, he sat on the ground in cups, staring at the floor like none of this was new to him. They wouldn't even let me leave until they cleared the building. I stood outside afterward, watching them drag boxes and bags out, watching them tape the door, watching them talk into radios like this was just another day at work. I kept thinking how easily I could have been blamed. How easily I could have been dragged away with him. How easily he could have locked that back door behind me. I went home with the sound of all those buzzing phones stuck in my head, layered on top of each other like a warning that came too late. The whole thing still feels unreal when I think back on it, like one of those moments you replay in your head, and it never sounds believable, no matter how many times you explain it. The day started completely normal. Nothing strange, nothing stressful, nothing that hinted my entire night was about to twist into something out of a documentary. I wasn't even meant to pick her up at first. We planned to meet at a small place near town, but she messaged me last minute saying her street was awkward and she didn't want to walk alone in the cold. I didn't mind. I had time, and it wasn't far. I remember pulling up to the spot she sent me. The road was narrow, with uneven pavement and houses squashed too close together. The kind of place where the streetlights buzz like they're tired. She came out of a side alley instead of a front door, which was weird, but I didn't say anything. She kept looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to follow her. She rushed to the car, slid into the passenger seat, and immediately ducked her head down so low I could barely see her in the mirror. That was when I knew something was wrong, but not in a dramatic flash way. More like a slow creeping feeling, like someone tapping your shoulder but you can't tell who it is. I asked if she was cold. She didn't answer. She just said quick things like telling me to start driving and not stay parked on her street for long. The thing is, she didn't sound scared. She sounded focused. Too focused. I started driving and she kept gripping the seatbelt like she was bracing for impact. Every time we passed a car or someone walking a dog, she ducked lower. Not in a playful way. In a way that made my stomach clench without knowing why. I asked again if everything was okay. She said she just didn't want people from her area seeing her go out. That sounded off, but I didn't want to push it. First date. Trying to be respectful. Trying not to make things awkward. The longer we drove, the stranger she acted. She kept asking me to check the mirrors. Asking if any cars were behind us too long. Asking if I could take side roads instead of the main ones. The kind of questions someone asks when they're hiding, not when they're going out for a drink. Her voice was shaky but not emotional, more like she was running on pure adrenaline. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. Her clothes were wrinkled and mismatched, like she put them on in a hurry. Her nails were dirty. Her hair looked like she brushed it with her hands instead of an actual brush. It was the kind of messy where you just had a long day. It was the kind where you haven't slept properly in ages. I pulled up at a red light and she completely froze. She slid so low that her head was almost on her knees. She kept whispering for me to drive faster once the light changed. I told her she didn't need to panic, and she just said I didn't understand. She kept repeating that part. You don't understand. You don't understand. Not angry, not upset, just drained. I started feeling something heavy settle in my chest. I checked the mirror again and saw her eyes darting all over the place, like she thought someone was tracking us. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't ignore the tension in the car anymore. The drive felt like it was stretching longer and longer even though we were still near town. Then everything happened at once. Blue lights, loud sirens, cars surrounding mine from two directions. It felt like the world slammed into us. Officers jumped out before my brain even caught up with what's happening. They blocked the road, shouted things I couldn't process, and pointed flashlights straight into my car. I raised my hands because I didn't know what they wanted. My pulse was pounding so fast I felt dizzy. The girl next to me went completely still. Not shaking, not breathing, just frozen. One officer opened my door and told me to step out slowly. Another pulled her door open, and the second it happened, she curled up tighter like she thought they were there to hurt her. I kept trying to ask what was happening, but they were talking over each other, talking into radios, talking to each other in quick clipped words. One officer finally told me to move to the side. Another officer looked at her and asked her name, but she didn't answer. She just stared at the ground like she was waiting for something horrible. Then one of the officers said something that made everything make sense and no sense at the same time. They said she'd been reported missing for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Apparently her family had been searching everywhere. Posters, social media posts, you name it. She'd left home after an argument and disappeared without telling anyone where she was going. She had been spotted in different areas running around alone, ducking behind buildings, avoiding cameras, avoiding people. Every sighting had been reported. She kept slipping through before anyone reached her. And she had finally flagged on a patrol car camera when she got into my car. The officers weren't there for me. They were there for her. I kept asking why she got into my car then. One officer said something that made the back of my neck feel cold for the rest of the night. She was using me as her escape bride. Not in a malicious way, not like she wanted to do anything to me, but because she'd been hiding from something or someone for so long that she started jumping into strangers' cars who matched the descriptions of people she talked to online. She read messages wrong, mixed up conversations, convinced herself certain people were coming to get her. My profile happened to match someone she trusted during her 2-week spiral. The whole thing hit me like someone had dropped a weight on top of me. The officers gently moved her out of the car. She didn't fight. She didn't speak. She didn't even look at me. She just let them guide her away. They wrapped her in a blanket and took her into one of the cars while paramedics checked her over. One of the officers came back to me and said I didn't do anything wrong. They said this kind of situation happens more than people think. Missing adults blending into normal places, using strangers as cover without the strangers ever realizing. I watched the car drive away with her inside, still curled up, still silent. I drove home slowly with the image stuck in my head of her ducking in the seat like someone was chasing us. I kept thinking about how easily that whole situation could have gone worse. I didn't know her. I didn't know what she was running from. I didn't know how many cars she tried to get into before mine. I still think about how lost she looked. I knew something was off about him way before anything actually happened, but not in a dramatic way. It was the kind of weird where your brain whispers at you, but you tell it to calm down because you don't want to ruin a first date over a tiny gut thing. We had been talking for a bit and he kept mentioning photography like it was his whole personality. I didn't mind at first. Everyone has something they hype up, but he kept hinting at this cool photography spot he wanted to take me to. He mentioned it 3 separate times before we even met. I just thought he was excited or trying to be quirky. We agreed to meet on a Saturday afternoon. The weather was decent, not too bright, not too dark. It had that weird calmness where the air feels thin and you can hear everything more clearly. I met him near a small cafe. He looked normal, a little taller than his pictures, and he had a camera strapped around him before he even said hello. The camera looked old but expensive. I noticed how tightly he held it, like he didn't trust anyone to be near it. He didn't want to sit down anywhere or get food or even talk much. He kept pushing the idea that we should head to the spot before the light changed. I didn't think much of it. I just followed him because I didn't want him to make the day awkward. He walked fast, like he knew exactly where he wanted to go. I started feeling weird when he kept turning around to look behind us even though no one was following. He did it 3 times in 5 minutes. Each time his eyes darted around like he was tracking something. The place he took me to wasn't far, but it was tucked behind a bunch of old industrial buildings. Not abandoned, but not friendly either. The ground was cracked, weeds sticking out through concrete, and the only sound was distant traffic. He pointed toward a broken metal staircase attached to a building and said the lighting there was perfect. The whole area looked like somewhere people use for graffiti backgrounds or low-budget music clips, not cute date photos. Still, I went along with it. He asked me to stand near the staircase while he adjusted the lens. He didn't explain what kind of photos he wanted. He just moved me around like he already knew how he wanted me to stand. He told me to tilt my head a bit, then move my hair to one side, and step back into a darker patch of the wall. I kept laughing awkwardly because I had no idea what kind of pictures he was going for, but he didn't laugh at all. He just kept snapping. I tried talking to him like a normal person, asking about his photography or how long he'd been doing it. He barely answered. His focus was on the camera like nothing else mattered. The more he snapped, the colder my stomach felt. Something about the way he positioned me was strange. He kept having me stand in uncomfortable angles. He wanted me near corners. He wanted my face turned halfway. He wanted my hands in certain places. The poses didn't feel flattering or cute. They felt set, like he'd done them before. I tried brushing it off until he asked me to step into this narrow alley behind the staircase. It wasn't even part of the main spot. It was darker, tighter, and quiet in a suffocating way. He lifted his camera and told me to stand still for a second because the lighting there was perfect. I stood there, but something inside me was screaming that none of this was normal. I started thinking maybe I should just leave, but before I could even decide what to say, the entire area erupted with noise. Tires screeching, doors slamming, someone shouting, then heavy boots hitting the ground. Police swarmed the whole place in seconds. At first, I thought something unrelated was happening in the area, but the second they spotted him, everything shifted. Officers from two sides moved toward us with this urgency that made my ears ring. They kept telling him to drop the camera. He didn't. He held it tighter, like he'd rather lose his arm than let it go. I stepped back, confused, my heart going crazy. Officers pushed past me, forming a wall between him and me, like they thought I was in danger. I had no clue what was going on. I kept trying to ask what was happening, but they kept telling me not to move. Then one of the officers showed another something on a tablet. I only caught a glimpse of the screen before they angled it away, but what I saw made me feel sick. It was a picture of a girl. Not me, someone else. She was standing in the exact same place I was standing minutes ago. Same angle, same tilt of the head, same pose. Even the lighting matched. He'd been making me copy her without me realizing. The officers grabbed his camera, and he finally dropped it when they forced his arm back. They ripped it off him like it was evidence covered in danger, and it was. One of them opened the side panel, looked at the memory card, and said something under his breath. Another officer walked over to me and asked if I knew anything about the stalking case they'd been investigating. I said no, I had no idea what he meant. I'd only just met the guy a day. They told me someone had been taking secret photos of a woman for months. Photos taken from corners, alleyways, industrial areas, staircases. Always angled the same. Always with her positioned in these strange poses. The images were being sent to her anonymously with messages attached. Messages telling her where she'd been, what she wore, how she stood. And the camera he was holding had the same serial number as the camera used in those images. I felt my legs shake. I didn't know if I was going to faint or throw up. All I could think about was that he'd been moving me like a puppet, placing me in the exact spots he placed her. Every small instruction he gave suddenly made sense in the worst possible way. He wasn't taking creative pictures. He was recreating the ones he'd taken of someone else. I was standing in a crime scene without realizing it. Officers asked him questions, but he didn't answer. He just stared at the ground like he'd already read the whole situation before it happened. They put him in cuffs and dragged him toward the cars while he kept glancing back at me. Not angry, not scared, just analyzing like he was studying another shot. One officer stayed with me and asked if I needed help getting home. I said no, even though my head was spinning and my legs barely worked. I walked out of that alley as fast as I could, past the broken staircase, past the flashing lights, past the officers taping off the area. When I got to the street, I felt like I had just escaped something I didn't even know I was in. I can't stand the sound of camera shutters anymore. I should have turned around the second I saw the blue lights bouncing off the windows, but I didn't. I kept walking like an idiot because I genuinely thought something unrelated was happening on our street. I'd been talking to this girl for a couple weeks, and everything had felt normal enough. She wasn't too clingy, she wasn't weird, and she didn't overshare in paragraphs. She suggested we hang out at her place for a first date because she said she had a new puppy that she couldn't leave alone yet. I didn't see the harm in it. I've met people at houses before. Everyone does it sometimes. But the second I turned down her road, everything just felt wrong. Not scary at first, just messy. There were officers walking around the pavement near her building. A couple of them were talking to neighbors clustered near the bins. I tried to convince myself she'd probably explain it all when I got to her door. Maybe someone in her building had done something dumb. Maybe a fight. maybe a break-in. I kept telling myself I shouldn't assume the worst. And then everything went sideways. I got closer, and one officer, who had been writing something in a notebook, looked up at me. Not casually. Not like I was some random person passing by. He looked right at me with this slow double take like he recognized me. But I'd never seen him in my life. I tried to walk past him toward the building, but he stepped forward like I just triggered some alert. He asked where I was going. I told him her name and said she'd invited me over. The moment I said her name, 2 more officers turned around. All of them stared straight at me like I'd just confessed something. I kept trying to stay calm, but my chest started buzzing with panic because none of them were blinking. One of them asked for my name, then asked me to stand still, then asked if I knew why they were there. I told them no, I hadn't even knocked on her door yet. I thought maybe she'd been hurt or something. I asked if she was okay. They didn't answer. Instead, they told me to wait by the wall and not touch anything. That's when I realized how serious the whole thing was. Inside the building, I could hear people talking loudly. Doors opening. Someone dragging something down the hallway. The kind of movement that only happens when officers are clearing a place out. While I was standing there, one officer kept staring at me like he was comparing me to something in his head. Then he said something that made the whole world feel like someone ripped the floor out from under me. He said multiple reports had come in over the last few weeks about a scammer running fake profiles, pretending to be a guy around my age, using the same pictures that matched my face. My own pictures. My actual face. Pictures I'd never taken for any of the accounts they mentioned. I swear my whole body went cold. Not sweating, not shaking, just cold. I kept trying to explain that I only had one real profile and had only been talking to her, the girl who lived in that building. But every time I spoke, the officers just looked more suspicious. One of them even asked me how many names I went by online. I told him one. Only one. I didn't understand any of it. They started showing each other something on a phone. I couldn't see the screen, but whatever it was made them all look at me again. Harder this time. One officer asked if I'd ever been inside her flat before. I said no. This was meant to be our first date. He asked how long I'd known her. I said barely 2 weeks, and he kept pressing like he didn't believe a single word. And then the front entrance opened wider and I saw them escorting her out. She didn't look scared. She didn't look confused. She just looked annoyed, like they'd interrupted her mid-task. Her hair was messy, her clothes looked thrown on in a rush, and her hands were cuffed. She didn't even glance at me at first. She just kept staring at the floor like she was bored. And then someone said my name loud enough that she finally looked up. The way she stared at me made my stomach hurt. She didn't look surprised to see me there. She didn't look embarrassed either. She looked almost amused, like she'd been waiting to see what would happen when everything connected back to me. One of the officers dragged a neighbor over, asking if I was the same guy they'd seen on our building's cameras earlier that week. My heart dropped so fast because I'd never been anywhere near this place before tonight. I tried to speak, but they held their hands up like they were tired of hearing it. They took me inside the building to compare me to the CCTV footage. I didn't want to go in. Something about being dragged into a place full of people I didn't know made everything worse. But they kept insisting. So I followed them through the entrance, trying not to stare at everyone peeking out their doors, whispering about me like I was some criminal. They brought me to a monitor room near the back where the landlord kept the cameras. They pulled up footage from earlier that morning, showing someone entering her flat while she wasn't home. The figure was wearing a hood, but when he turned slightly, the light hit his face. I thought my heart actually stopped. Because it was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me. Same jaw, same build, same haircut, same expressions even. I stared at the footage until my eyes started to blur. I told them it wasn't me. I wasn't even awake at that time. I was at my job. I could prove it. The landlord zoomed in more. Officers leaned in, watching every detail. I felt like my whole life depended on a few blurry pixels. And then one officer pointed something out. The guy in the footage had a scar on his hand. I don't. Another officer zoomed again near his wrist. He had some bracelet or band that I've never worn. His shoulders were slightly broader too. At first glance, he looked exactly like me. But once they started pausing bit by bit, tiny differences came up. I wasn't the guy breaking into her flat. I wasn't the one using fake profiles. Someone else had been pretending to be me. Someone she knew. Someone she'd been working with or protecting. Because the officers then told me she'd been messaging people from multiple fake accounts using my photos and tricking them into sending her money for fake emergencies. She'd been doing it for months. My head was spinning because I didn't even understand how she got my pictures. I don't post much. I don't even take many selfies. The officers said scammers sometimes grab pictures from tagged posts or old accounts or anywhere they can find them. They said they'd been tracking her profiles and tracing everything back to her flat. And when I showed up for the date, they honestly thought I was her partner in it. After the CCTV finally cleared me, they apologized in quick, tired voices. Not gently, not kindly, just enough to say they didn't need me anymore. Then they told me I was free to go. I walked out of the building while the officers loaded her into one of the cars. She looked out of the window once, straight at me, and gave the smallest smile, like she thought the whole thing was funny. I didn't go straight home. I walked for almost an hour, trying to clear my head, trying to remind myself that I didn't actually do anything wrong. But it didn't matter. I still felt like I had been dragged into someone else's world and barely crawled out. The worst part is knowing someone out there looks exactly like me. Enough to fool cameras, enough to fool her, enough to fool victims, enough to almost get me arrested. I don't think I'll ever meet someone at their house again. I shouldn't trusted the weird vibe I got before I even walked into the arcade bar, but I kept telling myself I was overthinking. The weather was weird that day, the kind where it's cold, but the sky looks too bright, and I already felt off. I almost canceled the date twice, but didn't want to look rude, and honestly I was bored at home. I'd been texting this guy for a week, and he seemed normal enough. Not too pushy, not too quiet, just average. Sometimes average feels safer than anything else. I guess that's what messed me up. The arcade bar looked decent from the outside. Neon lights, loud music bleeding through the door, the kind of place where people go to pretend they're carefree. I walked in and instantly got hit with the smell of fried food and cheap drinks. People were cheering at machines, coins rolling around, buttons clicking nonstop. It was chaotic, but in a fun way. I scanned the room looking for him and spotted him near a basketball machine. He waved like he'd been waiting ages even though I was only 2 minutes late. He looked slightly different than his pictures, but not in a suspicious way. More tired, maybe. He had that look people get when they haven't slept properly for days. I noticed it but ignored it. We talked for a bit while he showed me how bad he was at the games. I laughed even though half my brain was still trying to settle into the place. I'm not a huge fan of loud settings on first dates, but the lights kind of distracted me. For the first 15 minutes, everything felt standard. Nothing crazy. We moved from game to game and he kept asking small questions. Normal ones. Then he asked if I wanted something to drink and I said sure. He went to the bar and I stayed near one of the racing games, watching him wait in the queue. He kept checking over at his shoulder like he was looking for someone. I caught him doing it twice and brushed it off as him being awkward. I wish I didn't brush anything off that night. He came back with 2 drinks and we were about to move to a different machine when the entire front entrance erupted. Not loud at first, just sudden. A woman burst inside the bar like she'd been running for blocks. She looked wild, hair all over the place, face flushed like she'd been crying and yelling at the same time. Behind her were officers trying to keep her steady, but she ripped away from them and pointed straight into the crowd. Straight at him. It didn't even take a full second for everything to explode. People moved out of the way like they were scared to be part of whatever was happening. The whole energy inside flipped from fun to frozen. The officers pushed forward, trying to reach us, and the woman kept yelling his name, saying he broke into her flat that morning while she was half asleep. I didn't even understand half of it, but she kept pointing at him like she'd never forget his face. The guy beside me didn't move at first. He didn't react. He just stopped breathing for a moment like someone hit pause on him. Then he turned to me with this look that wasn't scared. It was something else. Something sharper. Like he knew this would happen eventually. Like he'd been looking over his shoulder for a reason all night. Before I could step back, he dropped the drink he was holding and sprinted toward the back of the arcade. Just full speed, pushing through people and shoving machines. The officers saw him and yelled, everyone in the place scattering like dominoes. I was stuck in the middle of it, not even knowing where to stand. People were bumping into me, knocking into machines, trying to get away from the chase. The woman started crying harder and saying things I couldn't even process. Words about him being in her flat, rifling through her stuff, standing near her bedroom door. She said she woke up to sounds and found her front window open. She'd been telling neighbors since morning, and one of them caught him on their door camera. She showed it to the officers who had been searching the area for him. and I was on a date with him. I felt sick. Not like normal anxiety sick, but full body sick, like everything heavy fell to the bottom of me. I tried to move out the way, but there were too many people blocking my path. The officers rushed past, almost knocking me over. The lights felt way too bright. Someone spilled a drink on the floor, and it mixed with something from a smash machine. Everything smelled metallic and sharp. The back exit wasn't far from where I was, but the crowd made it feel impossible to move. More officers were coming in from the front. They were shouting directions into radios. The bartenders were ducking behind the counter. The music was still playing like nothing was happening, which made it feel even more insane. I couldn't see where he went until someone yelled that he was trying to force the back door open. The door was heavy and had a push bar, but there was another lock at the top he forgot about. He kept slamming into it like he didn't care who saw. I watched from between two machines as he tried to throw his shoulder into it. He was panicking for real now, not the calm stillness he had when the woman first pointed at him. This was someone who knew he was cornered. Officers reached him fast. He tried to run again, slipping on the wet floor from a spilled drink, and crashed into a wall of stacked crates near the staff area. They pinned him down while he kept yelling things that didn't even sound like words. I saw his face for 1 second before they dragged him up. It wasn't a shocked face. It wasn't a confused face. It was an annoyed one, like he was irritated the situation played out in public. They took him to the back once they got it open, the same door he tried to escape through. The one who came in after him was in the corner, shaking, talking to another officer. She kept saying he'd been in her flat, going through her drawers and bags, and she only saw the clip on her neighbor's camera hours later. She'd been hunting for him since morning. I stood alone for a bit, still trying to breathe properly. People around me whispered, staring like I was part of whatever happened. Maybe in their eyes I was. I just kept thinking how close we'd been standing. How normal his voice sounded. How he'd laughed at himself missing shots at the basketball machine. And how he kept looking over at his shoulder like he expected someone to burst in. I left the arcade bar as soon as they let everyone out. I walked home without touching my phone, without checking his messages or deleting anything. It felt pointless. I didn't want to think about what would have happened if that woman hadn't come when she did. I haven't been back to that place since. The lights, the noise, all of it just reminded me of him standing inches away from me before everything exploded. I don't think anything in my life has ever flipped so fast from normal to messed up the way that night did. And the weirdest part is that it started out so basic I didn't even think twice. Like, I wasn't going there expecting anything crazy. I'd been talking to this girl for a bit, and she seemed calm, kind of funny, kind of chilled out. Nothing over the top. She picked the restaurant because she said it wasn't too loud and she liked the food there. I didn't care where we went. I just wanted something simple where we could actually talk without shouting over music. I remember walking and thinking the place looked way brighter than it did in the pictures online. The lights were warm, the tables were spaced out, and the staff all looked half-tired but friendly in that way restaurants always are on weekends. I was early, so I stood near the entrance, just messing with my phone while people came in and out. Then she walked in. She looked different than her photos, but not in a scary way. Just more plain. Less filters. She smiled quick and sat down like she didn't want to make a big deal out of anything. It was all fine at first. We ordered drinks, and I was trying to get comfortable. The kind of comfortable where you stop worrying about how you're sitting or whether your face looks weird in the lighting. I'd barely touched my glass when I realized something felt off. Not in the mood, but in how the staff kept glancing over. Not in a friendly checkup way. More like they kept looking between us, and then at each other. I thought maybe they recognized her or something. Or maybe they thought I was someone who wouldn't tip. I don't know. I didn't want to overthink it. She was talking about random stuff, like her job and her commute, and I was nodding along trying to match her pace. But the staff moving around felt wrong. They kept drifting near our table even when they didn't need to. One guy was pretending to wipe down menus that were already clean. Another one kept walking past with empty trays, staring too long at my drink. I started feeling weird, like maybe I'd done something wrong without realizing it. Then the moment that changed everything happened so quietly I almost missed it. I heard the sound of the front door click. Not in a normal way. It was like a lock sliding into place. The kind that doesn't open unless someone behind the counter unlocks it. I looked over and saw one of the staff standing with her back to the door, hands still near the lock like she was trying not to be obvious. The windows didn't show anything suspicious outside. No police, no flashing lights, nothing. Just the same street I walked in from. And she, the girl I was with, didn't even notice. She was still talking about some trailer she'd read earlier in the week. I couldn't even focus because before I could process the door thing, 2 members of staff walked over to our table. Not rude, not loud, but tense. They were trying not to scare her, but they were definitely scared of something. They asked me really quietly to not drink anything yet. They didn't even look at her when they said it. They looked at the glass, the one she'd been nudging closer to me the whole time. My stomach dropped hard. I didn't touch it after that. The girl froze for a second like she didn't understand why they were interrupting. Then she started talking again, but one of the staff cut her off, still calm but firm. They told us both to stay seated. They said everything was going to be sorted in a minute. I felt heat rush up through my whole body because I realized the other staff members had gone to stand near the exits, like they were making sure she couldn't run. And then everything clicked at once. You know when your chest gets tight and your thoughts all cram together like they're trying to push out the same door. That's what it felt like. I wasn't scared for myself yet. I was scared because the staff looked genuinely freaked out by her, and she didn't look freaked out at all. She just stared at them, not blinking, like she was annoyed they were interrupting her night. Then the manager came out from the back holding a tablet. He didn't look at me at first. He looked straight at her with this expression I can't even describe. Then he turned the tablet to me. The screen showed a paused CCTV clip. Inside the clip was the table I was sitting at right now. Same lighting, same setup. But the clip wasn't from tonight. It was from 10 minutes before I walked in. It showed her sitting alone, messing with the drinks after the staff placed them down, and then her slipping something from her sleeve into one of them. The glass she kept nudging toward me, the one they told me not to touch. I didn't breathe for a second. I think my hands actually went numb. I kept staring at the screen thinking it had to be someone else, but it wasn't. She didn't even deny it. She didn't defend herself or act confused. She didn't move at all. Just sat there looking at the screen like she'd already read this part before and was bored of it. The manager told us both to stay still and stepped back. That's when I heard the noise outside. Engines, lots of them. Car doors slamming. Heavy steps. The staff all moved at once like they'd been waiting for that exact sound. Someone unlocked the front door, but didn't open it. They were waiting. Seconds later, the police pushed in. Not 1 or 2, a whole group. They didn't ask questions. They didn't warm up to the situation. They went straight to her. They knew exactly who she was. She still didn't react. Even while they stood her up and put her hands behind her back, she didn't look scared or guilty. She just glanced at me once. Not long. Not angry. Just a quick look like she was sizing me up. Then she smiled. That small, quiet smile like she didn't care she'd been caught. After they took her out, the whole restaurant stayed silent for a long time. The manager handed the tablet to the officers and they left without much talking. One of the staff asked me if I wanted water. I didn't. I just wanted to get out. They unlocked the door again like it was nothing, like they didn't just save me from something I don't even want to imagine. I walked home without thinking. I didn't even check if she'd messaged me before. I blocked her straight away. I still go past that restaurant sometimes and the staff look at me like they're ready to move the minute I walk in. I guess I'm just glad they were watching that CCTV when they did. I don't even know how to start this without feeling weird all over again, but I'll just say it the way it happened, straight and messy, because the whole thing still feels like something I never should have walked into. I wasn't even meant to go out that night. I'd had one of those days where you're tired of scrolling and tired of people, but still end up agreeing to plans because staying in your room feels worse. So I said yes when this guy asked if I wanted to come over to his place for a simple hangout. Nothing fancy, nothing deep, just snacks and a film. That's what he said, and I didn't think anything of it. He seemed calm. Maybe too calm, but I ignored it. The vibe felt off before I even stepped into his building. I noticed a couple of police cars outside, the ones without loud lights, just sitting there. Officers were talking to neighbors in the hallway. A woman in slippers was leaning against her door, talking way too fast, while a guy in a hoodie kept pointing toward a flat across the landing. I wasn't going to stay there staring, so I kept moving, thinking maybe someone's bike got stolen or some argument happened. This place looked like the type where people argued about bins and parking. But they were looking around like something serious was going on, and I remember thinking maybe I should have canceled. Still, I kept going. When he opened the door, he looked normal. That annoyed me later because I thought weirder people at least look weird, but no. He was smiling like nothing outside was connected to him. He just moved aside to let me in. The hallway inside his flat was way too narrow and quiet. Everything looked plain, like a show flat that someone was trying too hard to keep neat. He told me to make myself comfortable and went to the kitchen. I walked into the living room and sat down, telling myself to relax and stop reading into everything. But the room was strange. Not dirty or messy, just strange. The walls looked freshly painted, but not evenly. Like some areas were smoother than others. I kept trying to figure out what felt wrong until I noticed a tiny dark mark on the wall opposite the sofa. I thought maybe it was a nail hole or something. The longer I stared, the more I realized the mark wasn't just a mark. It was an opening, really small. I didn't think too much yet, but it was enough to make me lean back a little. He came back with 2 glasses and sat down next to me. He acted normal, talking about random boring things while the weirdness in the room kept distracting me. The window was shut even though it felt stuffy. The curtains didn't move at all. Everything just felt controlled. If that makes any sense. It was the kind of place where you couldn't tell if someone had been living there for years or 1 week. After a few minutes, I heard a knock in the hallway. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't soft either. He froze for a second. Not dramatic, just stiff. Then he stood up and looked down the hallway like he already knew who it was. The knock came again, harder this time. I felt my chest clench because it wasn't the kind of knock a neighbor does. It was the kind that makes doors open fast. He told me to wait and stepped out of the room. I sat there listening. I heard voices but couldn't hear the words. The tone was firm, and I knew instantly it was the police. The officers from earlier. I didn't know whether to leave or sit still. I didn't want to walk out the room and make it seem like I was involved in something. So I just stayed silent. After a minute, 2 officers stepped into the living room without him. One of them asked where he was. I didn't know what to say. I pointed toward the hallway because that's where I last saw him. They told me to stand up and stay where they could see me. They weren't aggressive, just serious. Then they started looking around the living room. They moved closer to the wall I'd been staring at earlier. One of the officers crouched and pressed his hand against it. Then he called out to the others. The whole wall was hollow, like the inside had been carved out. They didn't break it open right away, but they pressed around the edges and the surface shifted slightly like it wasn't solid. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't want to believe what they were hinting at, but the more they pressed, the more obvious it became. And then the officer said something that made everything click. He said he needed to check if there were openings connected to other rooms. That tiny mark I read earlier wasn't just a mark. It was a viewing point. The walls were hiding a full narrow space behind them. He finally walked back into the room, looking like someone caught doing something he'd been expecting to get caught for. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just stared at the officers and kept his hands where they could see them. They started asking him questions about hidden spaces behind the walls, about recordings about items found in the building next door. I wasn't even hearing everything clearly because my head was spinning. The officers told me to step aside so they could go through the flat. I watched them push against another wall and expose a thin passage behind it. The space wasn't big enough to walk through comfortably, but it was big enough for someone to stand there with a camera. There were cables running through the gaps. Shelves, small devices. I didn't want to look too long. Another officer came in from the hallway saying neighbors had reported seeing him messing with the walls late at night for months, thinking it was some renovation thing. Apparently he'd been letting people come over for dates just to watch them through those hidden passages. The thought of me sitting on his sofa while he'd been doing that to other people before me made my skin crawl in a way I can't describe. They kept questioning him while I stood there feeling sick. None of it felt real. I didn't want to stay, but they told me I had to wait to give details. I kept staring at the sofa, thinking about how close I had come to being another one of those recordings stored behind the wall. After they finally let me leave, I walked out the building without looking back. I didn't wait for a bus. I didn't call anyone. I just walked until the air felt breathable again. The whole street felt different after that, like everything around me had been watching too. Now every time I go into someone's place, even friends, I catch myself checking the walls without even thinking. The feeling doesn't fully go away. I guess it sticks with you when you almost end up as someone's secret project.